Hello, welcome to the channel that aims to bring some light into games left in the dark. This is From the Void. So, you were one of the lucky ones who managed to get yourself a PlayStation 5, and you have already played all the big titles you wanted: Miles Morales, Demon's Souls Remake, Astro's Playroom, Returnal, Resident Evil Village, and now you're wondering, what else should I use my shiny new PlayStation 5 to play? Well, you came to the right place, because I have 10 other great games that are not getting as much attention as the aforementioned ones, but are very much worth your time and money while you wait for the next big hit. So here we go. We are starting today's list with Call of the Sea. This is a formidable first-person mystery-solving game with vividly beautiful graphics and a very interesting setting. You control Nora, who is afflicted by an unknown illness that gives her weird spots on her skin and makes her feeble. She's in search of her husband, who was looking for a cure to her illness, but suddenly stopped sending letters. She follows his whereabouts to a nameless island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and once she gets there, her weakness is instantly gone. And then begins her adventure full of great exploration and mystery solving, the likes of which I haven't seen in a really long time in video games. Really, there are some very clever and engaging puzzles to solve, surrounded by incredibly enticing locations to explore. This is a 10 out of 10 in exploration and puzzle solving in my opinion, and at the same time it presents well done voiceover and a very engrossing story that will keep you driven to push through whenever you get stuck in one of the many multi-layered puzzles presented, just so you get to find out where this narrative is going. This is a fascinating game, one of the best to have come out in the last 12 months for sure, in my opinion. Do not skip on Call of the Sea. Next up, Cyber Shadow. This is a terrific retro-style side-scroller action game that takes inspiration in the old Ninja Gaiden titles, but modernizes all the right things and keeps retro only what it's supposed to. The awesome pixel art, the phenomenal soundtrack it carries. Seriously, I'm just gonna turn it up for a few more seconds, you can thank me later. And the challenge here takes center stage actually. There are some very tricky sections to pull off, but differently from a lot of them old games, it doesn't over-punish you for failing, sending you all the way back to the beginning or anything like that. And even more importantly, it never feels like a chore because of the outstanding level design in this game, with really well thought out enemy placement and all manner of pitfalls that will really test your skills in using all the abilities your character can use in this game. In the beginning of the game, you may be underwhelmed by how simplistic it feels. Your guy can only walk, jump, and slash his sword, that's it. He can't even crouch. But throughout the game you will unlock several new abilities, many of which introduce very clever game mechanics, which really improve the gameplay. Seriously, you have no idea how cool some of these abilities are. For instance, at some point you will learn a deflect ability against incoming projectiles. This requires you to press the D-pad towards the bullet when it's about to hit you, and when you do it right, the enemy's projectile becomes an energy orb which you can hit to send it back, and it feels very satisfying to do so. level, and there are plenty of other abilities that work in a similar way. There's also a staggering amount of power-ups you can find hidden throughout the levels or by unlocking them at the save stations that really change up the way you engage the enemies. It's all very impressive. The gameplay in Cyber Shadow really goes to unexpected places. And so does the story. This game has a surprisingly deep story, told in a non-linear way, which makes it all the more interesting. This is for sure a genius game in terms of gameplay, music, and level design, and also very satisfactory in everything else. We are truly talking about a 9, 9.5, or even a 10 out of 10, depending on who you ask, nothing less. Do not overlook Cyber Shadow. Now, Maquette. In terms of novelty and implementation, this is one of the best puzzle games I've ever played. Basically, you have access to a maquette that represents the entire area you're in. You can place certain objects in the maquette and they will magically appear in full scale in the real world. And this works the other way around too. If you place an object in the real world, you can pick it up in the maquette in a much smaller scale. This is quite an interesting mechanism that is explored in many different and mind-bending ways throughout the game. Maquette also succeeds in presenting an interesting and very relatable story about a couple and their hardships living together and all that. The voiceover is outstanding and the music accompanying it makes for a rather emotional experience throughout the game. Maquette is a must-play puzzle game in my opinion, highly recommended. Next up is an overlooked gem of a game, The Sinking City. This is a great-looking, open-world-ish, action-adventure detective game set during the 1920s in the insular city of Oakmont that has been cut off from the mainland due to a great flood that made it almost impossible to get in or out of the island. This allows for the narrative to go deep into its Lovecraftian horror setting, and there is a lot of that in this game, from the disturbing-looking fish people residing in this island to the psychosis that afflicts most of the characters, including the protagonist, who is slowly but surely falling into insanity. The storytelling in The Sinking City is one of the strongest aspects in this game for sure. There are several different clans among the residents who pretty much hate each other, lots of mysteries going on, assassinations and all that. It's quite interesting. The main character, Charles Reed, is a private detective and takes on the investigation to get to the bottom of what is going on in this place. To do so, there are a number of mechanics in place, such as the protagonist's supernatural sense that enables him to follow on the footsteps of other characters once he has gathered enough clues, and the Mind Palace, where all clues gathered by the player are stored and can be manually combined to reach conclusions. This could have just been a meaningless gimmick, but it's actually implemented in a very thoughtful way, because the game allows you to make your own decisions, all morally grey, which is great, and they really impact the course of the narrative and feel very meaningful to the player. Now, the combat is a third-person action shooter where you'll have to be very mindful of your resources, so it's somewhat inclined to the survival genre. You'll be battling horrendous sea creatures, and there will be some tense moments which intensifies the feeling of oppressiveness that permeates all aspects of this game. The combat feels a bit clunky, but you get used to it and there is a lot of enjoyment to be had. The open world aspect is interesting too. There is a vast city to explore with many interesting locations to be seen and a huge highlight to the titular aspect of this game. This city is literally sinking. There are entire sections in town underwater, which again increases the feeling of unrest that permeates the entire game. The Sinking City is a bold game. It has great ambitions, and although it may be a little clunky on the combat side, it really shines pretty much everywhere else, and the bottom line is overwhelmingly positive in my opinion. If you're into Lovecraftian stories, this is a must play, and if you're neutral towards it, I would still suggest considering The Sinking City. Following up with The Pedestrian. I found this one very interesting in many different ways. First of all, this game has great looking photorealistic backgrounds, presenting some amazingly well detailed urban scenarios. But what I found the most striking about this is that these incredibly high detail city landscapes are not used in the gameplay at all. They're just there to contrast with the diminutive and two-dimensional perspective of the city's road signs and maps where the gameplay actually takes place. And what a great platformer the Pedestrian is. The gimmick here is that you can rearrange the signs and, more importantly, link doors and ladders together to form a pathway so that your stick-figure guy or girl can move from entrance to exit. There will be several other mechanisms included into the mix to change things up, like getting keys to open doors, springs to boost you up, and batteries and other gadgets to connect and open closed gates. It can be rather difficult sometimes to find the intended way to bridge the many signs presented in a level, but that's also part of the fun. I see it as a metaphor actually. It's not always easy to find your way through the many interconnected and abstract routes of the city, but the jazzy music accompanying this game eases you into the puzzle-solving mindset like nothing else. This is a great side-scroller puzzle platformer that should not be overlooked. It's kind of expensive though, given that this is only a 5 hours long game, so this is my only complaint about the Pedestrian. Other than that, this is a great lesser-known title on the PlayStation 5. You're most likely not gonna regret getting this one. Next up is Anodyne 2: Return to Dust. First of all, although it carries the number 2 on the title, this is not a sequel to the first game on the series in terms of the story. You can play them in any order, no problem. Now, with that out of the way, I have to address the look of this game. I know some of you will probably cast this one aside because of the PlayStation 1 and 64 look it goes for, but let me tell you, it is a lost style of graphic that faded away with the improvements in gaming hardware, but kind of also carried away with it a style of gameplay that is much appreciated by most. I'm talking about the Ocarina of Time Majora's Mask game structure, where exploration of a fully created sandbox world with clear frontiers but seemingly boundless possibilities takes center stage. One where there is next to no intrusive hand-holding, preserving a very pure sense of discovery. I miss these types of games, you know? They are so rare nowadays. But this one has it, and it's not shy about it at all. It's also not satisfied in just giving us that. It goes for a whole list of surprising, even if sometimes shallow, change-ups in the gameplay as well as the graphics. One that is available right from the start and is used throughout the whole game is this 8-bit looking top-down, where your main character, called Nova, uses her unique power to shrink down and clean the dust from the NPCs' minds and hearts that is corrupting them in order to turn the world into dust. That is the main purpose of Nova, to free the world from this menace. I know this is a hard sell because of the graphics and how odd and surreal the story and NPCs are, but this is a unique gem of a game in my opinion, although I have to admit it will only cater to a more specific audience. If you're not afraid of outdated graphics, give Anodyne 2 a try, it is well worth it. Next is OVIVO. This is a puzzle platformer that uses incredibly simplistic black and white graphics, which are used to draw some beautiful paintings in the scenarios of this game that really justify the basic colors. The gameplay is also simple but effective. You control this little ball with an antenna that can switch from white to black, which have opposing gravities to each other. By doing so, it becomes possible to roll up a hill that became a valley. This also allows for an interesting momentum-based gameplay where you can switch between the two halves back and forth and keep moving quickly. It is also great that the gameplay is very intuitive to learn. You will be grasping it in a matter of seconds. OVIVO is a very interesting game that should not be overlooked. Pretty cheap as well. Now, Shakedown Hawaii. This is a stripped-down and very fast-paced GTA-style game in an open-world Hawaii with everything you would expect from this type of game, such as a huge amount of missions to tackle, lots of other side distractions, as well as a lot of unwarranted violence and running away from the police. But it also simplifies everything else, actually making it feel much more of an action arcade title, especially if you decide to just tackle mission after mission, which I felt was the best way to play this game rather than digging into all the side missions and all the property ownership you can do on the side as well. It's very amusing, even if sometimes a little disturbing, that you control a very different kind of protagonist who is actually clearly a bad person. This is the guy. Yeah, not your usual protagonist. He's the CEO of a multinational company that is failing in every business they deal in, and so he decides to take matters into his own hands to revert the situation by, for example, blowing up all the delivery vans around town to bolster his local businesses that were losing market share against digital purchases. But even though you're playing as the villain here, the entire game is very focused on telling the story in a comical way, which ends up really balancing with all the wickedness of the main character. There are also two other controllable characters, but the CEO guy is the real focus of the story. Shakedown Hawaii is a great open world action title that provides a lot of mindless fun. It controls really well too, and the pixel art is just spectacular in my opinion. Do give it a go if you're into this type of game. Now, Sir Lovelot. This is a fast-paced platformer on the same vein as Super Meat Boy. I guess they call it platformer now. You control this little knight guy who is looking for love, but he always ends up getting kicked out of the princess's castle the next day. So it's back to the love searching. Pretty funny premise here. He can double jump or use a forward dash to surpass all manner of traps and pitfalls in order to find all the collectibles, some of which are mandatory, otherwise the princesses won't let you in. The game controls pretty well. It's not anywhere near the level of polish of the original Super Meat Boy, but it has its own charm and it's a pretty cheap purchase, and you can do a lot worse. Sir Lovelot is a fun little game for sure. Now for a mesmerizing game, Manifold Garden. This is a first-person mind-boggling puzzler with a very unique art style that uses fractal design in its setting. What I mean by that is that the same environment is repeated in the horizon infinitely, which is very mind-blowing to begin with. The main mechanic in this game is also pretty interesting. With the press of a button, you can switch the gravity to another direction, turning the wall you are facing into the floor. When you do that, the game paints that floor into its preset color, and all other surfaces on the same 3D alignment will also be highlighted in the same color. This helps with the puzzle nature of this game, which requires you to use this mechanic to get blocks to the correct positions. The puzzles themselves are simple in nature, but the execution can be very difficult. It can also be very challenging to find your next destination in this beautiful but purposefully confusing world. In conclusion, Manifold Garden is a perplexing and very hypnotizing experience for fans of the puzzle genre looking for something unique and worthwhile. Do give it a go if you're into puzzles. That's it for now. If this was enjoyable or helpful to you, let me know by leaving a comment or subscribing so I can make a second list. Thanks for watching and I'll see you soon.